Welcome to this video on how to install the Filr single appliance for Windows environments. Just so you're aware, I'll do this in real time, so there will be some long pauses while we're waiting for things to happen, but hopefully it will give you an idea. So first of all, go into your hypervisor and import the virtual appliance. So in this case I'm using Windows VMware Workstation, but you obviously might be using some other hypervisor here, Citrix, Zen, Hyper-V, VMware we use. Let me just find my single server OVF and I'll just open that up. So let's just call that Filr, and we'll pop that into the directory dcom/test/Filr. So I'm just importing that into my environment. There are a number of different files you'll find available. As far as the actual Filr web appliance is concerned, there are 4 different files you can download for the 4 different hypervisor environments that we support. So once this is finished importing, there are a number of things that we need to do before we actually boot this for the first time. So first of all, we need to check that the memory is suitable for our environment. It comes by default with 16 gigabytes of memory on the virtual machine. Depending on your environment, if it's a busy environment, you may want to increase that to something a little bit more. As far as processors concerned, again, depending on your environment and how many users are going to be using this, you may want to increase this. You also need to just check that the network adapter is on the correct network. So in my case, I want it on VMnet 0. And the most important thing here is that we need to add 2 additional disks to this environment. So the first disk is going to be a data disk that we add. So I'm just going to be adding a SCSI, create a new disk. As far as the size of this is concerned, there's some rules. If you look in the design documents, they'll tell you what's needed. But on the single server, we need to have enough space for the database that we're going to be storing metadata in about files and other things. We need enough space for the index, and we need to have enough space if we're using personal storage, which is storing files actually on the appliance rather on Windows servers. My gut instinct here would be to say go for something larger than you're intending, and then just thin provision it. So I'm not going to allocate the space now. In this case I've set it to 200 gig. Click next. I'm just going to call this Filr disk 2 and click finish. And then the second disk that I add here is going to be used for logging. So we'll just do the same settings, but this time I'll just leave that at 20 gig. This is only going to store log files on here. So in this case I'll call it Filr disk 3 and we'll click finish and click OK. So now we're ready to actually start this up and running. So I'm just going to power on this machine. And that should auto start. I'll just kick that off. So while that's coming up, let me just talk around some bits on those disks there that we put in. Those 3 disks, the boot disk, the data disk and the log disk, need to be able to be found in order. So if you're having problems, just make sure that your boot disk is, for instance, on SCSI 00, the data disk is going to be on the 01, and the VAR disk is going to be on the 02. Some people I know go and put that on a separate SCSI adapters, so you have it on 00, 10 and 20. You might get a little bit better performance out of that because they're not competing together, the multiple disks, but in practice it's not that much difference. So we'll wait for this to come up. A single appliance, by the way, is suitable for maybe several hundred users that you've got. It all depends very much on what the users are doing, how they're doing it, and that will up the utilization on the server. Most probably a better way, if you've got several thousand users, would be to do a clustered install, which gives you horizontal scaling, high availability as well. So first thing we get here is the license agreement. I'm sure you'll read the EULA, but the important thing on this page is the keyboard language. The bit in the top right here, I'm using English keyboard, UK, British keyboard, so change that. The reason you want to change that is if you start typing in passwords and so on, that may be compromised if you've got characters in different places on the keyboard. Then just click accept. And the next thing that we're going to be prompted for is a set of passwords. So we need to put in a password for the root user and the virtual appliance user. Typically I make these passwords be the same, though if you're going to separate out the roles, then obviously do set them to be different, and obviously don't forget what you've put in there. So I will just put in some passwords here. Set the NTP servers to be your standard NTP servers that you use in your organization, and then do check the region and the time zone. I'm in the United Kingdom, so I'll just select United Kingdom, and then we click next. We're next prompted for the host name of the server. So this will typically, in a single server environment, be the name of the DNS name that you've got for this server that people are going to type in to connect to this. So I'm just going to call this filerweb.demo.live and then click next. We then need to put in the IP address. So in this case it's 172.31.1.1. My subnet mask is, this is a class B subnet. The gateway is correct, my DNS server is actually wrong, that's going to be 31.1.251. I can add in additional DNS servers if I want at this point, and indeed domain searches. If I click next, then the next thing that I'm going to be asked for is where is the data disk, which is the data disk that we've got configured, and I can set the file format for that to be ext3, ext4, btrfs, xfs, and so on. So you can pick and choose if you use a specific file system type. Typically I tend to leave it at ext3. So you can see here this is selecting the SDB, which is the 200 gig disk that I created. I'm just going to click next. I next get prompted for the data log location, and here you can see that's SDC, and that's the 20 gig drive, and I'll just click next. This page is for if this is going to be a cluster node that I'm installing. In this case it isn't. We're just going to say then no remote storage, and then I'll do next. So what will happen now is this will go through and configure the system, and this may take a few minutes to do. So once this is completed, we'll be prompted on the server console. It will give us a prompt to go to the virtual appliance administration screen, which runs on port 9443. So this you do from a browser. You just type in your server name :9443. It's actually listening on HTTPS, so you do need to precede that with HTTPS, and then you get given the option to accept the default certificate. We ship with self-minted certificates by default, which when you initially go in you need to obviously accept, because the browsers won't trust them fully. Something you want to do during the configuration, and I'll take you through this later on, is to import a proper certificate into the environment that you've got there. So you can see that configuration is going through quite happily. Another thing that we need to do once the server is up and running is that the appliance that we've imported is an appliance at Filr 4.0 level. The current shipping product is Filr 4.1, and indeed we've got new releases coming out this year. So in April 2020 we're hoping that Filr 4.2 will come out. So we need to set up the online update for this, in which case the appliance will check for updates. It will prompt you that those updates are available, and you can then apply those. And obviously we need to get from the appliance that we've installed at 4.0 to the 4.1 level, and so that will be something that we need to do as part of our initial configuration of this server. So this should finish shortly. Okay, so you can see here it's prompting me for the address that I need to contact in order to set up that initial configuration. So what we need to do now is just bring up a browser and go to that address. So let's just type in that address, https://filr1.demo.live:9443. So you can see here there's the security warning. I'm just going to bypass that and accept the risk, and we then get prompted to log in. So the user that I need to log in as here is VA admin, and the password that we set as part of that boot sequence that we got asked. So there are a number of areas here that we'll come back to, but initially we're just going to go for this configuration option, and we've got a prompt for doing a large or small deployment. This is a small deployment. I'm just going to click next. It's going to prompt me for database password. So again, don't forget this, because there are occasions that you need to know what the database password is, and then prompting me for the default locale. I'm going to be UK, and then the administrator user ID. You can change the administrator ID to be anything you want. The only thing to bear in mind, the default password is the same as the user ID. So in this case, the password is going to be admin. I'll just leave it at admin. But if you feel that's a security risk, you can change that. Then we'll just do finish, and that will continue. Don't leave this page because that might cause problems. Just leave it running. While that's running, let me just take you through some of the other bits on that page that might be useful. If you need to change network settings, just come into the network bit there, time. Digital certificates will be coming along later because we need to import those in there for our proper certificate, so we stop getting that certificate error. Storage, you'd come in here if you ran out of disk space. You can expand your disk in the hypervisor and then expand the partition by coming in here, and you can expand the partition. On the system services front, depending on your environment and security options, you may want to start the SSH here, and you may want to set it as automatic so it comes up automatically. But the good thing here is this option at the end for downloading log files. So you have different processes here. So the actual file process, Jetty, which is the admin side, Postfix for mail, FAMPT, which is the process that connects to remote servers like the Windows server or OES server, and the Postgres logs for the database there. So you can access those files should you wish to. Firewall doesn't tell you much, just what ports are open. You can change your admin passwords here. If support give you a patch, you can import it there. Some support options for sending information to support. We'll go through the online update in a moment when we want to patch this up to 4.1, and then we've got some monitoring options down the bottom there. So you can see there the server has come up. We now most probably want to just do some quick changes to this. So the network settings, we've got it listening on port 80 and doing a secure redirection to an HTTPS port. Actually internally it maps through to 8443, but locally it's just 443. So that's the port that you need open to the outside world. Net folders, we want to ensure that that is set to allow synchronization. There are times you may want to disable that. We can change database settings here should I wish to, but just leave the default as with the search appliance. Some of the things that most probably we do need to change are on the reverse proxy side. You need to even if you're not running a reverse proxy, just put in the host name that users are connecting there. So if you put in a server name when we were configuring this, put in the, here the and I can see I've misspelt that, so I'm just going to do Filer web there. Put in the host name that your users are going to be connecting to there. Outbound email is important. We need to be able to send emails for a number of reasons. People sharing things, people getting notifications that a file has changed, so I can subscribe to a file and I'll get told when somebody has edited that file. I get notified when somebody has downloaded a file for the first time, or indeed if I've requested a file upload, I'll get notified for that. You can use the local postfix server, but that then means that you need to be able to get out of the system from this box. Typically I tend to try and bounce off an existing mail relay. So in this case I'll just type in mail.demo.live. We'll leave the port at 25, put in the username. So in this case I've got the mail relay configured to accept relays from this address. Obviously normally you wouldn't have a relay that was open, so if you needed to authenticate you'd just put the password in here for whichever user you put in here and say that authentication is required from there, and then all we need to do is just click the test button, test connection button. And you can see there the connection is valid, so that's okay for me. Coming on down, Jvm Settings, if you change the amount of memory in your server, then you would need to come in and change that to take account of that. By default, it's between a bit over 50% of the memory available. I tend to set it as I get bigger with the amount of memory. I'll go up from 50% to maybe 75% of the available memory there. The one last thing we need to do is down the bottom here, I need to import a license into the system. The license you'll have got either from your customer portal, and you can download it there, or as part of the evaluation that you're on. The appliance that ships with a 60-day evaluation of advance, but you may, if you've got the extended license, you may want to import that here. So if you just go to the license, you can browse for the license which I've downloaded, so that one, and I'll just say OK to that. And what I need to do now is reconfigure the Filer server. So whilst that's reconfiguring, let's just pop back here and we'll deal with the digital certificate side. So as I said, you don't really want your users getting that prompt coming up about invalid certificate. So we can import a proper certificate here. If I just go into digital certificates, I've got Jvm certificates here, and this would be where I'd import maybe my LDAP certificate if I was doing secure LDAP. But I'm just going to take the web application certificates. I've got that self-signed certificate that we talked about before. So in this case, I'm just going to import a key pair, and I'm just going to find my certificate, which is, I think, that one, and the password for this is one. And it prompts me to restart the server to get those to take effect, which we'll do in a moment, not quite yet. You may want to import any intermediary certificates as well that were issued with that. So in this case, I've got a intermediary, which is that one, and I'll take that. And finally, what I need to do is just enable that key. So here I've got an option set as active once I've selected the key. So I'll just set that as active, and then I'm going to have to reboot before that certificate will work. So let's just close that down. And while we're here, let's just do the online update. We won't apply it quite yet, but let's set it up whilst we're waiting for the server to come up. So if I go into online update, I'll be prompted for, do I want to go against the Micro Focus Customer Center or local SMT server? Most of you would be going against the Micro Focus Customer Center. Just put in your email here. And then the activation key. So again, the activation key you get from the customer portal or as part of the evaluation that you're on there. So I'll just I'll blur that out once I've finished this video, so you don't see my activation key. Then I'm just going to click on register. So that will go out and register us against the customer center. You'll see in a moment that it will come down with the patches that we need to apply. You can't pick and choose which patches to apply. You can only apply them all, and the system does take into account what order they need to be applied in, so you don't need to worry about that side of things. and hopefully we should see there are all the patches that we need to apply in order to get up to our 4.1.2 level. So let's go to another tab, and here I'm just going to hit the filer box, filer web.demo.live. I don't need to do any ports or HTTPS on this. Again, we're still using that old certificate at this point, so bypass that, and once we reboot, that certificate should come into effect. So I then get prompted for my login. So the login I'm going to put in here is going to be whatever the user I specified for admin. In my case it was admin before, and then the password is going to be exactly the same. Defaults to that. So if you were using Bob as your administrator, the password would be Bob. I'm just going to sign in here. First thing is it prompts me to change my password to a new password for the administrator. So there we go, and I'm in Filer. It prompts me about product improvement. This is an anonymous collection, sends us information about how many users are using it, what types of files you've got out there, number of files, number of net folders, that sort of thing. There's nothing that identifies you in there. You can turn it off if you want, but you know, it helps us if we get that information because we can test things against your types of environment. So we've got that up and running. What we now need to do is to go and configure the users. We need to configure the files, and most probably we want to configure some sharing as well. So that's the next few things that we need to do. So to do this, just go into the administration console, click on your name in the top right, or the administrator name rather, go and click on administration console. We then have all our administration options. Down towards the bottom we have the LDAP option, so select that. And we can have multiple LDAP servers, so I could go against multiple AD environments. I could go against an AD and a E directory environment here. In this case, I'm just going to go against one environment, so we're just going to add. It prompts me for the LDAP server URL. This is going to be ldap://ad.demo.live, and then just put the port on the end. If I'm doing LDAP-S, obviously need to change that, but as we mentioned before, you do actually need to import the certificate for the LDAP server. For the user DN, typically I create a user, maybe called Filer Proxy, which has rights to read the directory. So here I'm just going to do cn equals Filer Proxy, comma OU equals mgmt, comma DC equals utopia, comma DC equals micro focus, comma DC equals com, and then just put in the password and change the directory type to Active Directory. You don't need to modify any of these things in this instance. Then just click on Users, and this is where we're going to be importing users from. Click on Add, and I can browse for where I'm picking users up from. This is the first time we know if what we typed in was correct. So just be aware that if this gives you an error, go back to where we were putting the name in, the user and the server, and just check those settings. I'm just going to import users from the London container. I'll search subtree. We've got various criteria here for importing home directory information. Typically you'll use the LDAP home directory attribute that you've got set in the directory for that information, but we do have other options if you haven't got that populated. I'll just click OK on that. I can then add in additional containers should I wish for users. In this case I'm just going to use that one, and similarly as far as groups are concerned, I can again something to bear in mind here is that you need to import all the groups that you're using to assign file access controls on the Windows file system. If we don't have the groups, we don't know who's a member of the group, and therefore we don't know who's got access to see the files or folders, and users won't see what they expect to see when they're in Filr. One thing I didn't mention on the user front, if we just go and look at that one, I've got this filter here for importing users. That will bring in effectively all the users that we've got under that container. What you may want to do is just create a group in Active Directory called Filr users, for instance, and then just use that import members of that group. So we can do that in here as well. If you look in the documentation, it will tell you how to do that. So you just need to use a filter which says member of, and the full name to the group that you want people to be a member of. So let's just say OK to that, say OK to that, and then let's just go into the user settings. So I've got some options here for when I bring users in. Do I want to disable the account if they've gone from the directory, or do I want to delete the account? Typically I'd say do a delete. It will give me a warning. Do I really want to do that? And also delete associated workspaces and content. That's just because it will self-tidy up after itself if the user's been deleted, rather than leaving the user sitting around in Filr. Go and set the time zone. In this case I'm in GMT London, and English there. Set my group settings. Again, typically I tend to delete groups once they've been deleted in LDAP, but again, it's your choice. And then synchronization schedule. How often are you going to import users into the system? Typically you may want to do this every day or periodically during the day. If a user hasn't been imported from LDAP, they can still log into Filr. It's just that obviously people won't be able to see them and share information with them until either they've logged in or it's been synchronized. We also have local user accounts, so if you're going to create accounts in the Filr system that are not in your LDAP server, so maybe a contractor that's coming in that's not in Active Directory, are you going to let them use the system as well? And in that sort of instance, they'd use something called personal storage, which is stored their files they're sharing would be on the server, the appliance. So let's just say OK to that. Oh, forgot to do a synchronization. So having done that, let's just do a synchronize all, and this should bring my users in from the directory. You can see there we've brought in some users, and indeed some groups have been brought in as well from the directory. So that's imported the users into the system. Next, we just want to set up the file access and what files we've got in there. What I tend to do here is set up a proxy identity. So rather than having to find a user that's going to be the proxy user for each server that I've got, I can have one place where it's stored, and if the password changes I only have to change it here. If you've only got one server you're exposing, then you don't really need to worry about proxy identity. So here, let me just call it a name, Windows Proxy. Proxy name, let's just go and browse for that user. Where was my Filr proxy? There we go. Let's select that user and put in the password. There we go. So that's a proxy user. That user that we're going to be using as a proxy with the file system needs to have full rights to the file system. Typically it's used for a couple of things. One is when you're bringing the file system in and the metadata about the file system. Obviously we need to be able to read that information, and also if I share a file with someone, maybe an external user who obviously doesn't have rights to the file system, it will be that user that will get the file for them from the file system. We don't obviously update AD or the file system with users' information that are not in the AD originally. So let's just go to NetFolder servers, and you'll notice here that we already have a NetFolder server in place. This is because as part of the LDAP import, we imported people's home drives, and they recognized that this server was being used by some users, so it set that up for us automatically. But I've got an exclamation mark explaining that there's a problem with it and I need to do some updates on this. So here, if I click on it, I get into the configuration. The server type is going to be Microsoft Windows. I've got the server path here for that. And then on the authentication, I can just specify the proxy name and proxy password if this is the only one that's being used. But in this case, I'm going to use that proxy I configured earlier, the Windows proxy. And I've got this option to test the connection that it will work. So you can see there, the connection succeeded. So that's working fine. Let's go to Synchronization Schedule. So Filer needs to get the metadata of documents and files into the system. You know, who owns a file, who's got access to it, what the file name is, what date it was created, how big it is, all of that it brings in. The actual file stays where it is on your existing Windows file server. So we've got a choice of when we want to have it check for that information. We don't put anything on the server itself, it's purely passive in how it gets this. So typically I'd say do a synchronization every day. However, if you've got many tens of millions of files that take more than maybe 12 hours to sync, and you don't really want that to be happening during working hours, you may want to specify do this only once at the weekend. In this case, I'll specify that we'll do it every day, and I'll do it once people have gone home at 1900. So we can repeat periodically and so on if I wanted to. Let's just go on to the synchronization options here. Do I want to index the content of the files in the net folders? I think most probably I'd advise you not to do full content indexing. This allows you to search within the files for anything that you want to look for. So I can find any document that's talking about Micro Focus, for instance. It doesn't look just in the title, it will actually look in the text of the document, and that will work with Word documents, PDFs, PowerPoints and so on. Second thing we've got enabled here is just-in-time synchronization. So this will do a check of the file system as a user navigates into a folder, just to see if there have been any updates to the folder. Has someone added a file since it last synced? And if so, obviously it will get those coming back there. Leave the defaults there for that information, and most probably leave the option for desktop app to trigger the initial home folder sync. Let's say OK to that. So that now means that we've got access to our home folders if I were to log in as a user here. So next we need to set up our shared folders. So to do this we need to add another server into the system. So whilst I'm on NetFolder servers, I just need to click on add. The name of this server is going to be shared files. Users won't see this, that's just for the administrator to see. Server type is going to be Microsoft Windows, and the file server path is going to be fs1.utopia.microfocus.com/shared. On the authentication side, I'm going to use that same proxy, Windows proxy. I'm just going to test the connection. That's working. Synchronization schedule, I'll do every day at, let's stagger it a little, at 9 o'clock. And I will, you need to enable just-in-time sync here. Again, obviously, if you want to index the full content, you can. Just be aware that obviously if I'm indexing the full content, the size of the index is going to be bigger. I'll click OK to that. So that's set that up. Now we need to set up what shared folders we want to expose there. So in the left-hand menu here, just select the net folder option. We click Add, and I'm going to create a share here for sales. Now this is something that the users are actually going to see. So call it something that they're going to understand. Which net folder do I want? It's going to be the shared files one, and the relative path is going to be /sales. I can test the connection on that. That works, which is good. And then I've got the options for the indexing just-in-time sync that I've got configured there. In this case, I'll just use what I've got configured centrally on that server. We go to the rights. So this is who can actually access this folder. Typically, I say that all users can access that folder. And you may think, you know, in a moment we'll be adding a finance folder. Why would I do that? All users can access the finance folder, or sales folder in this case. What we're saying is really that all users have the possibility of accessing it if the file system allows them. So if the rights on the Windows server don't let me see a particular folder structure, I won't even know that it exists. So often I go in and I see people have replicated their file system rights with 20 or 30, you know, different settings in here for different people. Really, if you're just giving file access, just use all internal users. It makes life a lot easier, and leave it to the file system to sort out. The only time that you want to come in here and change things is if you've got different sharing rights that people will have. So if I come in here and I take my Filr 11 user, for instance, I can say that they've got access to the folder, and I haven't assigned sharing rights yet, but you can see down here I can set whether they can share internally, external, and we'll go through that later on. If I take the synchronization schedule again here, I'll just take the same synchronization that's defined on the net folder server. And as far as data synchronization, is this folder, can this be accessed from the user's desktop? And can they use this in online and offline mode? So those are just choices that you may want to do. If we say OK to that, and then I get prompted to sync the folder now, I'll say OK. If I click on that little circle here, I'll see an update of how the synchronization is going, and that will change to a check mark once it's finished. You can see there it's found 111 odd files or so. So I've got that coming through quite happily. And remember we talked about how long the synchronization is going to take. You can see here it tells me that took all of 5 seconds. I haven't got that much data in here. So let's just add in the other two net folders. So I had one called marketing, and let's put a capital M on there, and that's in marketing, let's just test the connection, go to rights, give all internal users rights to that. Synchronization schedule, I'll use what's on the net folder, and they can use that everywhere, and we'll sync it now. And then the other one is the finance. Here that's going to be /finance. Oops. Test that, and that's fine. Do rights again. As I said, I use all internal users and just leave it to the folder system, the file system, to sort out whether you can see it or not. We'll use the server synchronization set on the net folder server. And this one I don't really want to be visible on the user's desktop because I don't want people taking finance stuff offline, for instance. If I say OK to that, and we want to sync that. So we've got that all set up now. One last thing we need to do is, if you're going to be sharing files, we need to enable sharing, and we need to set the sharing up on the net folders. So here I've got an option called Share and Comment Settings. If I just select that, you can see I've got a master set of rights that people have. So here, for instance, I can say that by default all users can share with internal users. If they wanted, let's say they can reshare items as well, and I can say OK to that. And let's say that user I was going to try earlier, Filr 11, they can share internally and externally. So these are master sharing rights that control what the user can do. If I go into a net folder where I'm not allowed to share, then I won't be allowed to share, even though in here it says I'm allowed to share internally and externally. If I just say OK to that, then let's just set up those net folders for sharing. So as far as sales is concerned, let's just add that Filr 11, and I could use a group here as well if I wanted to. So here, notice I can now set this so I can share internally on that folder as that user. I can on marketing, well, let's just use the marketing group here. So I've got a group, and let's say that marketing are allowed to share internally and externally to people. And finally on finance, well, we don't want anyone sharing anything, but all internal users, I'm just going to give them access to see it without sharing. But I may say that the chief executive or whatever is allowed to share from that folder. So that's got that all set up. What we want to do now is just close that down. And we haven't rebooted the server yet, so let's just go and reboot the server. So here, I think most probably I'm going to need to re-authenticate to there, yeah, because it's timed out. So let's go in as VA admin, and I'll just go to the home, and notice I've got the big red exclamation mark telling me that there are patches to apply. Tell you what, let's apply those patches before we do the reboot, because sometimes after applying patches you have to do a reboot. So now if I go into update now, that will apply all those patches. So this will take a few minutes to do. Say OK. Obviously it may take people offline when I'm patching. So that's going to apply those patches there. So while that's going, the other appliance that you may want to do and install while you're installing a single server is the content editor appliance. That allows you to do online editing capabilities and indeed concurrent editing. So as a user is editing, all I've got down at my endpoint on my workstation is the bit of the document that is visible to me, and should somebody else be editing the same document and they're typing on that bit, I'll see as they're typing and so on, and so it's quite a useful tool for that side of things. And that's a separate appliance that you need to install, and we'll do that in a different video. So some of the other things that you may want to do now we've got this set up are to maybe set up branding on the system. So you can brand the web page with your company logo as people come in. You also have options to brand the desktop application if you're running the desktop application, and you have options to brand the mobile application. So if you're running Filer on your iOS devices or on your Android devices, you can brand that so they look as if they're part of your organizational infrastructure that you've got there. Some of the other things that you may consider doing are setting up for file upload requests. So I can take a request from if somebody needs to send me a big file that they can't email because it's 20 meg. And I do this quite often myself. If somebody's trying to send me a log file and the email system bounces it, either theirs or ours, then I can send a file request to them. They just click on the link, upload the file, that will appear in my home folder, and I'll get an email saying that that file has been uploaded. So a very easy way of getting files in from the outside world to you. Some of the other things that you may want to do with this are set up groups for different users and types of users. So within an Active Directory, for instance, I can have a group called Filer Mobile Users, and then I can assign rights for that group to use Filer Mobile, but not other groups, people who aren't in that group. So you can get some quite granular control going down here, and indeed down to an individual as far as what they're able to do. So I could stop an individual from using mobile and they have to come in through the web or indeed through desktop for accessing Filer. So you've got different options there that you can set up. We can also do things around the security for mobile devices. So on a user group level, we can specify whether somebody has to have is allowed a cached password. Do we want to enable fingerprint or PIN to get into Filer? And we can set that at a user or indeed group level for that sort of thing. We can also, something that you may want to do is implement multi-factor authentication. So depending on what version of Filer you're running, you can use multi-factor authentication as somebody tries to authenticate to Filer from any device. So that may be from their mobile device, from their desktop, or indeed the web. Then for instance they could get be prompted for a PIN, and SMS is sent to them with a 4-digit PIN that they can type in, and then they get access to Filer. So you know that it's really the person that you think it is. They know the password and they've got the person's phone, for instance, to get into Filer. We also have full auditing capabilities, so you can run reports that will log what a user has done. So it will log who's viewed files, who's shared a file, who's modified documents, that sort of thing. And so every action that somebody does in the system does get logged into that log file, and you can specify how long that log file keeps information. By default it's 6 months, but depending on your industry that you're in, you may want to extend that to 7 years, for instance. Obviously the database is going to grow because this information is stored in the database, but if your industry mandates that you've got to keep it for a while, then you can obviously do that. Also, as well as the desktop application on a Windows, or indeed which is available for Windows or indeed Mac, we can have integration into Microsoft Office. So within Word, if you install the add-on, you can open up documents directly from Filer, and you can save documents into Filer and indeed share files from there. Another thing we've got is the Outlook plugin that allows you to attach files from Filer to messages you're sending. Well, it doesn't actually attach the file, it attaches a pointer to the file, so the recipient can click on that link and get access to the file. There are a few advantages of that. One is if you've got a big document you're sending, it's not going to bounce because all you're doing is sending a link to that document. If you have a change to the document, then they can see the change as it happens, and of course you save on disk space in your mail system because we've got a single message store effectively. So having that started, let's just go and do a reboot. And that will now do a restart on the server. So let's just switch over to the console here. We'll see what's happening. So that's coming down. So a single server install that we're discussing here, just so you're aware, there's no supported way to move from a single server to a large, or indeed a large cluster install. There are some unsupported ways, but generally I would say if you're going to be expanding in the future, then most probably implement a clustered install for Filer, because that lets you implement a scalable infrastructure, even if it's just a single node cluster. Bit of an oxymoron there, I know, but it takes maybe 15 minutes to put in another web appliance into a cluster, and immediately that gives you the scalability for a whole load more users into the environment. And of course a cluster install also gives you high availability options. So that server has come up, but the filer won't have actually come up at this point. So what we can do, just to show you, there's a log file that we can look at, which will tell us when filer is finished coming up. I'll just do a tail F on a file called opt novel filer Apache Tomcat logs, and the file I want is called catalina.out, and in here that's the Tomcat startup file, but it will tell us when filer is finished coming up. Otherwise you'll keep trying to hit it and you think that it hasn't, it's not come up, and quite often I get people getting concerned that they've broken filer when actually it's still starting to come up. So that's the line we're looking for at the end. You can see it says server startup in 134,000 milliseconds. So that shows us, tells us that filer has actually come up. So let's go back to our browser, and if I just hit filer on that, should hopefully come up. There we go. Notice that the padlock isn't giving me a warning anymore, and this is a secure connection. We're using the right certificate now. Notice that the version is now 4.1.2, not 4.0, and let's just log in as one of our users. That's filer 11 and password. So now I should see his home drive, reading it for the first time. So there we go, all the files in his home folder that we've exposed, that it picked up through the Active Directory attribute. And if I go to net folders, I can see those 3 net folders that we had set up. And for instance, if I go into marketing and let's find a file here, I've got the option there to share the file. I can see I'm allowed to share it externally because of the little email envelope there. And if I just go and have a look at the finance folder, which I think I said I wasn't allowed to share from, I haven't got the option to share that file. So we have a working system. The only other thing that you may want is this is running 4.1. We do have the beta new UI that you can go into if you wanted to. This is a usable interface. It's not as fully functional as the one I was just showing you, but here, no, it's not the user ID. It's going to be filer 11 and the password, and So here, if I go to my files, you can see the files there. This is giving me right mouse click and that sort of thing. If I want to share a file, I can come through here and share through that. So it's a different interface, more responsive, but just be aware that it is beta currently until 4.2 ships in April or May 2020. I hope you found this useful, and you can now successfully install Filer. Thank you for your time.